Now that's R.C. Sherman's story. His competitor is Casey Spurlock, Nashville, Tennessee, running his first ever Nitro Funny Car competition, and already today he's seen some excitement. Earlier, he defeated this man, John Force, the #1 qualifier at 5:28, and we were on board the Oldsmobile with John Force as he took a drubbing from the rookie. Look out the side window of the Force car.
Casey Spurlock knocking off a true heavyweight to pick up his first win. Steve talked with him.
Boy, it feels great.
Competition yet to come here at Phoenix. And there's John Force in his funny car, round number 2. Force has the lane choice as he's ready to face Jim White. They bring the top down on that machine. Now, John Force won the Keystone Nationals at Maple Grove last year. Now you're on board with John Force. We have a very special arrangement. Take a look at this. As he goes through his burnout, look at the smoke come up into the cockpit. We have Steve Evans in two-way radio contact with John Force. They can talk to each other. Let's go ahead, Steve.
John Force, Steve Evans. Beautiful burnout. What do you expect from the car here in the second round?
Sounds real good, Steve. You got a lot of muscle.
So John Force is ready. We've got a major radio network here. He can also talk with his crew.
Son, we got good oil pressure. How's the motor look, okay? Everything's just fine, John.
So John Force in radio contact with almost everybody here at Phoenix as he brings her back and puts her on the line as he's ready to face Jim White.
John Force from Yorba Linda, California, one of the most popular funny car drivers ever in this sport, with one of the most talented crew chiefs ever, Austin Coyle. They qualified number 3 to 5:33. Now here is the hard luck guy from last season, Jim White, Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was either in the wall, upside down, or on the fence. Car on a Roland Leon valves. That won't happen this year. Qualified well with a 5:38. Now, there is Roland Leon. No one has backed up more funny cars than that man, and I mean it. Statistically, no one has. Let me ask you something, though, Don Garland. What could John Force's crewman tell him about that car on the radio?
Well, he can look at the exhaust pipes and make sure everyone is hitting properly, that there's no little puffs of smoke. Also, the sound. They'll get a different sound outside the car than he'll get inside the car. And it's just nice to have that confidence.
All right, here we go. John Force in the near lane. Jim White in the far lane. You're on board with John Force.
Boy, I'll tell you, muscle was an understatement.
He never saw Jim White, and neither did you. 5:26 wins it. Back on the starting line, Don is with the man, Austin Coyle, the crew chief.
Oh, 5:26, you're right in the hunt.
Oh, it's no problem. We're just working out this new motor deal with that slot blower on there like Prudhomme showed us the way at Indy last year, and we're getting pretty close. That's the best mile an hour we ever ran.
Great, thank you.
Well, you talk about power. White came off the line with a better reaction time, but it was power that was the ally to John Force. Take a look at this run.
Well, you know, we heard John say on the two-way radio that it had a lot of muscle. Well, that's what it takes. And, you know, the driver can feel that inside the car. That engine just vibrates up through the frame rails.
John Force takes the win with a 5:26. Let's go to the far end.
John Force asking the crew if he was late. You were a little late, but the car was quick enough. 5:26.
Well, I know, you know, coming back from Maple Grove when I won that race down there leaving, and this morning I really deep staged and it gave me a good lead time, and Coyle said, Force, maybe you're hurting us for lane choice because it does slow the car down. So he said, cut that out. We'll just outrun him if it works, and I was really late, so trade out there, huh?
Indeed.
John Force.
John Force is under his Oldsmobile body, and it's not just to find some shade. What's going wrong, John?
Well, you know, this is one of them $15,000 bodies, a honeycomb body. It's one of the only one out here. And for some reason, it's coming apart. The roof's caving in. We ran almost 280 with it, and it's shoving the sides out. It's blowing the windows out of the side of it every run.
Anything you can do to stress it up?
Well, I'm going to leave that to Austin. They're pretty busy, and I'm just taking a second to take a look and see if I can find what's going on.
We can actually see on the driver's side window all of those cracks. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I guess what really aggravates me is it keeps blowing my name out of the window every run.
The decal blows up. It's just RE now.
Well, we'll take it. We'll fix it.
One thing about it, Force always hangs loose.
In the meantime, we're on board once again with John Force. Perhaps they have their problem solved, but you can see on the left side the decal is still kind of drooping off the side of the car as John Force is ready to take on Dale Pulte. Let's go to the far end. Steve Evans is now with Bruce Larson.
Before the body went down on Bruce Larson's car, we observed that the bottom blower pulley is sheared completely off the crankshaft. You got a break, boy.
I sure did. I saw Mark drop back, and I figured he'd never catch me, and then mine quit, so I thought it's just a matter of trying to coast over the finish line.
You probably just thought the belt had come off.
I didn't know. You know, you don't try to figure something like that out until you get around the corner.
Okay, see you in the final.
Thank you.
Larson is happy. In the meantime, up at the starting line, John Force, they bring the body up on the car.
Well, in the old days, they thought that was a problem, but in this case, it's just Austin Coyle is disconnecting the ground wire from the second mag. The car is now running on the dual magnetos.
Well, Austin felt that maybe doing the burnout on 2 magnetos a couple of years ago was responsible for 3 successive blower explosions. It's a habit he got into that he doesn't really want to get out of. 2 of the best funny car drivers in the land, Dale Pulte versus John Force. In the round previous, Pulte was a little slow off the mark, and that's not like him. He'll be working on his reaction time here. You can bank on that. John Force near lane, Pulte in the far lane. Only one will go to the final to meet Bruce Larson. John Force staged and ready. We're with him. A bad start by John. You can see Pulte off to the left. And they both run 5.33 seconds, but Pulte wins with daylight between them because Force was so slow off the starting line. He's going to be sick about that, Don.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Austin Cole's going to be sick too. Prepare a car like that, and something happened to Force on the line. I don't know what it was. Unbelievable hole shot, starting line advantage is what we call it in drag racing, and Pulte got it. And Force was never able to make up the difference. Even though he ran a full 14 miles an hour faster than Pulte, there was still Dale Pulte at the finish line.
Here in the semifinals, this is Casey Spurlock. And riding along with John Force in the Castrol Oldsmobile, the cockpit filling up with smoke as he completes his long initial burnout. Force qualified in the number 2 spot with a 5:30, beats Scott Coletta in his first round race. In round number 2, he raced Jerry Caminito from Brooklyn, New York, who was the number 7 qualifier with a 5:47. Our onboard camera was along for the ride as Force and Caminito had nearly identical reaction time. But the win went to Force with an elapsed time of 5.55 seconds. His speed, 257 miles an hour. That advances him to the semis where he is matched against Casey Spurlock, the number 5 qualifier. In his second round race, the competition, Jim Dunn out of Long Beach, California, the number 6 qualifier with a 5:46. A great 5:39 in his first round victory over Rundhild, the Norwegian, gave Spurlock the lane choice. Dunn had problems. Spurlock went on to another 5:39 at 268 miles an hour to move to the semifinals, where now it is John Force and Casey Spurlock squaring off in Gainesville. The lane choice going to Spurlock. He has selected the lane nearest the camera. Again, we're riding with John Force. Both hands on the wheel as he leaves the starting line. Up in smoke goes Force. And Spurlock with a 5:51. 259 miles an hour, goes to the finals for the second time this season. As we look at this race again, you see John Force in the far lane of the racetrack. He had deep staged in an effort to gain an advantage at the start, but it did not pay off as Spurlock was 0.03 of a second quicker, and then Force lost traction, went up in smoke, and the victory went to Spurlock.
Coast through and go into the semifinals. Sitting inside the Castrol GTX Oldsmobile of John Force, there on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the burnout already being conducted by Mark Sievers. As As we ride along with John, you're sitting inside the cockpit of the dominant car in competition. John qualified in the #1 spot with a 5:25. Then in his first round race, he set low elapsed time of the race thus far at an outstanding 5.23 seconds. He defeated Dal Denton on that run. His competition is Mark Sievers, driving the Rialto, California-based car of John Lindsay. Sievers defeated Jerry Caminito in his first round race. Sievers turning a 5:36. That's a full 1/10 of a second improvement over his #9 qualifying time of a 5:46. The lane choice, obviously, going to John Force in the near lane. Not a broad, expansive vision for John Force, but just enough to see the green light on the tree. Sievers with problems and Force across the finish line. 5.28 seconds at 279 miles an hour. Yet another 5:20 elapsed time for John Force. Back at the starting line. The electric starter motor spinning the supercharger, which in turn turns the engine over, allowing it to fire and come to life in the Miller High Life Oldsmobile of Ed McCulloch. This has been quite a race for McCulloch, one of the original stars of funny car racing. He did not qualify at this event until the final attempt late Saturday night. Steve?
John, America rode along with you on that one, and I have to tell you, it was a thrill.
I don't know exactly what it runs, Steve.
5:28.
Well, it's consistent. We're really excited. It's starting to pay off the breakage we've had. We left $100,000 in metal from here clear back to California, and it's just whipping these 20s out right and left, and it's just consistency, and it don't matter who we race.
Down over you and John. Crew Chief Austin Coyle directing John into the water box to begin the burnout procedure. This dominant car of funny car racing has had consistent 5:20 from qualifying all the way to this point in eliminations. John has not been slower than a 5:28. He is racing against Mark Oswald. Oswald is in the lane nearest the camera in the Ford Probe of Candies and Hughes. There is one driver that is intensely interested in the outcome of this challenge between Force and Oswald, and it is Bruce Larson climbing out of his car at the far end of the racetrack. He's turning off the air bottles that control the clutch operation, and then will be directing his attention to the starting line to see who gets an advantage, if anybody, and most importantly, who crosses the finish line first. Force going through the final procedures before he brings the car into the staging beams. Alongside of him is Mark Oswald. Each car producing nearly 4,000 horsepower. And John Force with a big lead and a victory. Another 5:20 elapsed time, 5.28 seconds. His speed, 278 miles an hour. Oswald trailing with a 5:41, and Force almost goes into the guardrail. As we look again, you can see a very slight advantage that was gained by Oswald, about 1/100th of a second, the timers tell us. Then John Force quickly pulled ahead until at the midpoint, the 8th mile point, he had more than a car length, a couple of them in fact, and kept that lead across the finish line. The final round of Funny Car Eliminator will find John Force against Bruce Larson, with Force in the 5:28 having lane choice.
John Force, you are just wringing their necks today.
The competition, for some reason, seems to be a little bit off. It's making us easy. It's these turn-off roads that are scaring me, Steve. I almost put her in the wall right there. What can we say? It's consistent. We're happy with it.
5:28.
It shook a little bit harder, and I can read the confidence in Austin's eyes. The car's okay, and it'll repeat again. And if I can just leave on time, we'll be okay.
Here's what might win it for you. You have lane choice.
Well, lane choice is very important, and you know, when you got a handful of sponsors like you see on the side of this car, you better produce. I let them all down at Arizona, and I hope to God I don't let them down today.
You never let the sport down, John.
That's a true statement, car eliminator underway as Austin Coyle pulls a wire off of that ignition system. He also using the same technique. In fact, he developed it. They're doing a burnout only on one magneto, then getting both to fire for the race itself. A final check of the gauges on John Force's Oldsmobile sends him to the starting line against Bruce Larson. Larson for the second year in a row in the final round of the Super Nationals. A year ago, he lost the title to Scott Coletta. Now challenging Force for the 1990 championship. Force like a cat ready to pounce. Grabs the butterfly steering wheel and pulls ahead of Bruce Larson, who has problems. John Force wins the race. He has been absolutely dominant. As we look again at that race, Bruce Larson traveled just about the length of a football field and then went up in smoke. That gave the win to John Force, his time slowing to a 5:36. Let's go now to Steve Evans.
John, you stomped him, you whipped him, you beat him up, you're the champ.
I'm really excited, and when these guys get here, I want to thank all my sponsors. I got a right to, you know that. Castrol, Jolly Rancher, Wax Shop, Easy Wider, Austin Coyle, my biggest sponsor. Let me say that. Let me say that.
The time slot, 5:36.
Don't scare me like that. We're very happy. Like I said, I told you earlier today, and I keep talking about it because of the breakage. We ran a lot of parks between Pomona and through Arizona here. We left a scrap pile behind, and Coyle kept saying, Force, we're going to get your money back. I cried every day about it, and all of a sudden, it got some back, so I'm really excited. But most of all, I'm proud for him because that guy's been taking a real beating, Coyle, and I love him, and he's nuts, and this is all corny, but I rode him, and he pulled this thing out.
Steve, I wonder...
Visit with one of the top funny car teams. Here's my buddy, Paul Page.
Well, Steve, with engines warming up and down the line and final preparations being made now on John Force's funny car for this very special race, the Winston Invitational. 8-car fields and the top cars in the sport, literally the best of the best. And we're talking big money here, too. $300,000 purse. You can get $10,000 just for being the top qualifier. So Austin Coyle, John Force's crew chief, what do you have to do to win this thing?
Biggest thing one's got to do here, the way this track is to not smoke the tires 150 feet off the starting line. But I believe that we have a handle on the clutch operation enough to get through that spot and still leave the power in the motor that we need to win.
And you're hoping for a win for Force?
I feel pretty sure about it myself.
All right, Coyle and the crew are ready to go. Now, what about the technical side? Let's get an update there.
Has business commitments now that prevent him from going to every race, so a fine new shoe. And here is John Force, the #1 qualifier at 5:27. And you remember Austin Coyle, the crew chief on that car, went kind of out on a limb with Paul earlier and said, I'm pretty sure we can win this thing.
You remember, too, his prediction, though, that the guy that figures how to get the clutches hooked up here is going to end up being the winner. John Force, one of the most personable men in drag racing out of Loma Linda, California. Austin Coyle, who uses a computer, his brain, and a whole lot of savvy to get that car going. They face Richard Hartman out of Laverne, California. That's Nick Bonifant's new driver. They qualified 8th with a 5:51. They have something no one else has.
Top field racers all use very precise rack and pinion steering, and have since the early 70s when the engine was put behind the driver. Funny cars, well, like this one right over here, still use conventional steering, the type that has been on cars since there have been cars. It is a pitman arm down, a drag link to a front spindle, and then a tie rod to the opposite wheel. One car owner, Nick Bonifant, decided as quick as these cars are going now that his driver, Richard Hartman, needed more precise control. He has gone to the trouble of putting rack and pinion steering on a funny car. And look how complicated it is. A knuckle here, down to the side of the car, another knuckle, more knuckles as we travel our way up to the rack and pinion steering box. Now, Richard has to be very careful to not oversteer this car. He can't just idly move the steering wheel around like maybe you could on another funny car. But when he needs the control, he's got it instantly.
Don Garlits, doesn't that seem a little too complicated, and can't you steer it too quickly?
It would certainly seem like that to me, Paul, looking at all that linkage down through the motor. Plus, I get the distinct feeling that there's a rod running right by the side of that engine that I wouldn't like.
So, the car with the rack and pinion steering, that's Hartman in the near lane. John Force over on the far side as they both concentrate on the light. We'll ride with John Force. The quarter mile lies just ahead.
Just about 3.5 Gs off the starting line for John. Oh! And the youngster Richard Hartman is into the wall. But for a second there, Don Garlits, I thought he was on his head.
Sure was a close one, Steve. I don't know how he ever recovered from that thing. I guess we can thank the wall for it, really.
Well, I'd say he grabbed the wall, but you really can't see much damage from this angle. The wing looks in pretty good shape. No marks on the back end of the car. Let's take a look at it again, Don.
Richard Hartman puts a full 1/10 of a second into the bank with that starting line advantage. But then the wheels start to spin in that marginal near lane, and the car turns immediately left. But the rack and pinion steering seems to be working as Hartman almost saved the car.
Round 2 of Funny Car here at the Winston Invitational. And there is Casey Spurlock out of the famous racing family, ready to take on McCullough. Let's go back to the far end.
John, you had to be leery when you went to the starting line of that racetrack.
Well, we saw what was happening, and Coyle got out the deal. He backed the mags off. It was obvious. Car slowed down quite a bit, right?
Exactly, in the 534.
Well, you know, you're racing for a lot of money here, and you just can't take a chance to try to impress these guys that you can run another 20 when the racetrack might be a 30 racetrack. So we did what we had to do, and we won a race, and that gives us a tune-up for next round.
That's good thinking. Make the change right in the staging lane.
Well, I leave that to Austin. I'm too nervous myself, and he made the right decision, and I just hope the kid got into the wall. I hope he's okay.
He's just fine seeing the semis.
Okay.
That's very interesting. Backing off
head-to-head. John Force, the body going down, no problem. Just like Bruce Larson earlier, they do the burnout with one magneto, lift the body and hook up two. And his competition, if you've been paying attention, would have to be Ed McCullough. He has run 5:28. Force has run 5:27. Force was in qualifying, though, Don Garlits.
And that's right, because McCullough ran his the round before, and that's what really counts. They always say in drag racing, you're no better than your last run. Well, McCullough's last run was a 5:28, so watch out.
And Force, of course, is in that near lane that has been questionable throughout the day. As Force, look at McCullough. He bounces his way as he lights those tires, and Force in the near lane takes the win with a 5:44.265. The traction going away and bouncing McCullough in the air. Pretty good move to get it stopped. Austin Coyle ought to be happy with that one.
Well, that was a tough one you put out that time, Austin.
Boy, I'll say so. Looks like there's a problem down there from all the smoke. I kind of wonder what we got to fix, but we'll get it, whatever it takes.
Austin Coyle, a bit worried about that blue smoke that we saw there, Don.
Well, you can tell by this race that McCullough was set on pure kill. He had John Force, and he had him, well, I'm telling you, he didn't have a chance. But look at that front end on that car. It comes up. It looked like he was going to join the 360 club, hadn't it been for them wheelie bars on the back of it. But he looked over in that other lane, and he saw he was still ahead of Force, and he just kept trying to get after it. He kept trying to save that run. He knew he could win if he could just get down that lane. But finally, it got completely out of control, and he had to give up.
You know, oftentimes the driver doesn't know what kind of a drag race he was in until he sees a replay on television, but McCullough did a big wheel stand alongside you.
I tell you, he's crafty, that old man. He got me up there on the start line. I couldn't get him to stage. And Coyle, he's looking, don't play the game, don't play the game, go on in. And I sat on the thing, and finally I went in, and then no tree, it just sat, and it sat. And I was running out of brain, I'm telling you, and I know I was late leaving on him because he was out, and thank God he got in trouble.
The most important thing is you and I are talking right now. That's what matters.
That's it. How do we run?
5:44.
5:44. Well, we got a problem, and she's oiled, but that's what he gets paid for. But there's a big purse, and we're going after him.
Well, they have several problems. One of them may be that
North
544.
Carolina, the Winston Invitational, the finalists in Funny Car and the finalists in Top Fuel. The Funny Cars are already lit and ready. It's got to be John Force, who qualified #1 up against Mark Oswald. Already we have seen the #1 qualifier in Pro Stock go to the winner's circle. Can Force do likewise?
Well, Force certainly has the lane that everybody has wanted. The far lane has been the key factor throughout the day. Mark Oswald in the Candies and Hughes car, well, definitely it is an uphill battle for him. He's been a little bit slower than Force and is on the bad side. But there is a problem that has to be considered on the Force machine. You will remember that Austin Coyle was watching very carefully as that car went down the lanes, and he saw some smoke, and he saw some action that he didn't like. Well, they've gone back to the pits, and they did a lot of work on this machine. And standing there keeping track of all the action was Steve Evans, and he talked with John Force.
John, a guy who has lived and raced as lean and mean as you have all your life, to leave here with close to $40,000, that's really something.
It's a lot of money, and it's exciting. We've been here a number of times in our career, and you're right. When Winston and NHRA put up this kind of purse, you just can't lose. But you know, we got the low ET money. That was $10,000. We're very excited about that. The rest is really gravy. What we're trying to do now is trying to do what Don Perdome did here last year. He won the race and ran low ET. I mean, he just really whipped up on these guys. And if we can do that, that's what we're really trying to accomplish.
You've changed engines for the finals to try to do that.
We pulled a 27 out of the hat yesterday to get low ET, and Austin was real pleased, but all day long we've been struggling. The car won't just come back. The harder he leaned on it, the more he hurt it. And he finally just said, this motor just doesn't work. I'm taking it out. And I said, Austin, give me a reason. He said, I never give you a reason. Motor don't give me a reason. I'm just putting another one in, and that's what he did.
Good luck at the final.
Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes the motor will talk to you, and sometimes it won't. Now, this rod is for $25,000 plus a wide assortment of contingency money. Remember, John Force already has $10,000 in the bank.
Mark Oswald in an airline would be the first to tell you he's a very fortunate driver here today. The kind of times he has run, well, probably shouldn't have put him here, but he just raced the right cars at the right time.
Yeah, he was just able to get down the lane each time. He always had smoke coming off the tires. He never has made a real good run, but he's always been there.
All right, a new engine for John Force, same power plant for Oswald. It is Force away first. Force has the advantage. Here comes Oswald. It is not enough. Oswald can't catch John Force, and they run identical 5.43 second elapsed times. Let's go to Don with Austin Coyle.
Oh, John is 40,000 richer, Austin.
Yeah, that's true, and like I get a pretty good percentage of that, it makes me happy. We worked hard to get this one here today, but we've got some things that are working real well for us this year. You're going to see a lot of us.
You've done a good job today.
Well, thank you, sir. Coming from you, that's especially a compliment well received.
Well deserved.
Thank you.
Well, you remember back at the start of the race, Austin Coyle said he thought he had it figured out. He certainly did with the help of his driver, John Force. Now we take a look at the run one more time, Don Garlits.
Well, John Force certainly did his job on the starting line as he pulled this race out of the hat right to start with. And Oswald, they got the clutch figured out. Don't see any smoke coming off that car at all. It runs real good. In fact, it ran better than John Force. Just didn't lead properly. And as in drag racing, if you snooze, you lose.
You know you'd want to.
I just can't be hyper no more, Steve. I don't know what's wrong with me.
You're happy, buddy. We did it.
John Force has finally been raced to his knees. I never thought I'd see it happen. Give him about 10 minutes, and he'll be back.
Woo! We can go home. 43. We can go home with a win.
Always thank my sponsors. Always thank Castrol and the way they put this program together, and Jolly Ranchers for 12 years of support. Austin Coyle, my friend, he knows that.
You won this one for us, bud.
He gets fired once a week. I threaten to quit once a week. But I tell you what, Winston and the kind of money they put up here, and NHRA, well, they've only kindled the fire because we got some dust, and we're going to get a whole lot tougher, and I mean that.
Austin and John Force with money in the bank could be a really dangerous combination.
Hey, Dirk!
Well, you've got to love it when John Force takes the win, and he certainly did here in the Invitational at Rockingham.
I want to remind you, at the end of this race, we're going to be announcing the winner of the Goodyear Eagle Driver of the Race Award. Goodyear will be giving $1,000 to SEMA and the scholarship fund to the Specialty Equipment Market Association in that driver's name. You're on board with John Force. At the wheel of his Castrol Oldsmobile, he is racing the blower drive service special of Al Hoffman. In his first round race, Al got a red light. At that point, his competition, the winner of the Winter Nationals, Casey Spurlock, had the race won. But in his quest for a low elapsed time, a quick ET to get the lane choice in round number 2, Spurlock in the far lane let his car drift just a little bit. It came in contact with the timing devices, a violation of the rule that reinstated Al Hoffman to race John Force here in round number 2. Force qualified with an elapsed time of a 5:29. Good for the number 4 spot. The body being lowered over the engine and chassis of the funny car of John Force as the crew checks the oil pressure gauge, a quick check of the parachute, and Force begins to roll forward into the staging beams. His crew chief is Austin Coyle. That's the man out directing traffic. For Al Hoffman, his crew chief is his wife, Helen Hoffman. Here we are riding on board with John Force against Al Hoffman at the Southern Nationals. Force the last to stage. Something going wrong with Hoffman's car. And you just took a ride at 264 miles an hour as John Force had an elapsed time of 5:38. Hoffman idling through. Something going wrong with his car right at the starting line. It was unable to leave the line with any authority, and Force advances to the semifinals.
That 5:38 elapsed time indicates that John Force and crew are playing it conservatively, unlike Jim White, who smoked the tires in that lane. Great job. You gauged it just right.
Well, we saw that happen, Steve, and I know Coyle when he gets nervous, and there's a lot of points going down here, and Spurlock falling out gave us a chance to go around him, and we just didn't want a mistake. It's going to hurt us on lane choice probably, but the car's not running the way it should, so we're going to just take another approach at getting these guys.
That's 2 down and 2 to go. The way drag racing ought to be.
Steve, in most cases, it's always an advantage to have lane choice. You never really know what's going to happen between right now and that final round race. Whether McCulloch keeps or loses the lane choice is totally dependent on the outcome of this race between Paul Smith in the near lane and John Force, where our onboard camera has a look right out the front window of the Oldsmobile. And Paul Smith upset John Force. The biggest victory, I am sure, of Paul Smith's career. A 5.35 second elapsed time at
8.72 miles per hour.
Well, you know, they set the clutch real loose to keep it from smoking coming off the pan. They gave up a lot of ET there, Steve.
Austin Coyle starting John Force's car, and he does it differently than anybody else. For a long time there, you heard the engine just run on the alcohol prime. He was squeezing into the injector. Finally, he nodded to Force, who turned the nitro on, and what a difference in sound, Brock.
Oh, instantaneous. There is no sound like an engine running on pure nitromethane. It's an unbelievable rattle. It sounds like the engine's literally going to come apart on the next explosion, right, Don?
And pure nitromethane it is. Most of these cars are running between 95 and 98% nitro at this point. In fact, they've just gotten some new fuel from another manufacturer, and it claims to be even purer than the old nitro, so they should get noisier.
As you get a ride with John Force during his burnout, let's go to the other end of the track.
In lieu of the electronic clutches from last year, the electronics were much more repeatable, easier to adjust.
Here's John Force. The view John Force just got as the body came up on his funny car. Crew chief Austin Coyle always does that. What they're doing is putting another magneto on line. They do the burnout with one, the race with two. John Force, the winner at the Super Nationals in Houston this year. The crew chief, Austin Coyle. There's none finer and few better paid, I might add. Now, Force has a bye run, just the way the ladder happened to work out with Kranberger unable to make it into first-round competition. And he'll be challenging the clock instead of another car. He wants lane choice, Brock.
Well, so far the lanes have been a little unpredictable here at Memphis, so you can be sure that John Force, that you see right there, over his left shoulder, the launch, he'll run as hard as he can. You're with him as he runs this quarter mile in 5:38, 265 miles an hour.
Now, if you could just feel the G-forces to go along with that picture, Don Garlits, that would be one whale of a ride.
If we could ever get that into the home, we'd really have something.
Right now, let's go to Steve.
Well, John Force continues to be one of the top, if not the top, funny car in the country, 5:38.
Well, we're really excited, and it's coming around just like we planned. Crew's getting faster between rounds, and we got a shot at winning a race here.
The racetrack equal in both lanes?
I think the track's good. We're kind of following Top Fuel and watching the guys, but I think it's good. I think there's going to be some good heads-up racing.
That's the kind we like.
What John is saying, any of these Top Fuel cars all make about the same horsepower.
So you can some smoke with the Funny Car semifinals. I'm Steve Evans along with Don Garlits and Brock Yates.
All right, two veterans of funny car competition going against each other here in the semifinals. Ed McCulloch, John Force. There you see Force doing his burnout. Both these men, veteran drivers, difficult to pick one against the other, but they both look for an edge. And earlier, Steve had a look at an effort on Force's part.
As crew chief Austin Coyle fills the tank with nitromethane on the John Force funny car, I'm reminded that since nitro was discovered by the racers in the mid-50s, it has remained basically the same high horsepower fuel. I'm sure there have been improvements in the refining process, but the fuel Austin Coyle is putting in this tank today is a bit different. We're calling it Chinese nitro because it does indeed come from China. And the difference, I'm told by the people importing it, is that this fuel is not petroleum-based like the nitro in this country. And China has the only plant that can make it with natural gas, and they claim that without the petroleum, it cuts down on detonation. Well, you know, that sensation is pinging in your car going up a hill. It's hard on parts, and it robs horsepower. Austin says it's still too soon to tell whether there are distinct advantages. He thinks the detonation problem is less. We do know they sound different, and the fuel smells just a little different. Chinese nitro.
Well, Don Garlits, you've been around that hot stuff for over 30 years. What do you think?
I think it is better. I talked with the importer. The fuel is purer, and that's very important. Not made with petroleum. That could well be important. I think these cars that have tried this fuel have shown an increase in power. Now, whether they want to admit it or not, that's another story.
Let's go for a ride with John Force. And Force, maybe too much Chinese nitro. He blazed the tires. He got back on the throttle trying to catch his opponent. But it's FD Ace McCulloch going to the final round with a 542. He just kind of stuck there in the 540s and not much speed at 267 miles per hour.
And oh, boy, we got a good one. John Force against Jim White and Roland Leong's famed Hawaiian automobile. And I'll tell you what, Don, John Force, the pressure's got to be on him. He's chasing McCulloch in the points lead, as was Larson, but Ed McCulloch just keeps winning and winning, and just in the last race was a runner-up. So he's got a streak that's going to be hard to beat.
Well, John Force has got to do well at this event if he wants to seriously challenge McCullough's points lead. And Austin Coyle is just the man to give him the power to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Their opponent has been running better than he has in his entire drag racing career. Jim White from Tulsa, Oklahoma, has finally seen the 520s in Roland Leong's car. Roland himself wrenching this machine with some technical assistance from a guy named Wes Cerny, who's a plenty bright guy. In fact, a lot of the crew chiefs are hiring what I like to call a thinker. Oh, there's a problem with the Jim White car. They've had to shut it off. Oh, boy, is this the break John Force needed? He can do almost anything wrong and still win unless he crosses the center line or smacks the wall.
I've always said you got to have a break every once in a while in drag racing because it's so demanding.
And John Force went so many years without any luck at all. He was like runner-up 12 times before he ever won a national event. Let's ride along with him. You bet he won't take it easy. He'll want lane choice, every advantage he can get.
What a ride. These drivers want that full computer tape for the crew's next run.
A great winning run by John Force. Let's go to Brock and see if we can find out what happened. Well, coming up in the next round, John Force, you will have a very important date with Ed McCulloch.
Well, it's very exciting here, but who's got lane?
You do.
What do we run?
42.
42, just by a hair there. That's good. It's very critical to make a move to try to get around Larson. Maybe we got a shot at that today in the point steal. We know it's going to be tough. McCullough's been tough, but Coyle's had this thing right on all weekend, so I couldn't be happier right now.
We'll see you then.
All right, so John Force feeling pretty optimistic his pit.
In the past, you've heard me telling you about the benefits of belonging to the National Hot Rod Association, and I thought, why not let a loyal member racer like John Force do that? In fact, he's reading his National Dragster. How about it, John?
I sure am. You know, Steve, I've been racing these top fuel cars for 16 years, and, you know, I've been an NHRA member all that time. I got my pin, I got my decal, my patch, my rule book, my National Dragster. You know how I have brain fade without National Dragster. I wouldn't even know where I'm at today.
Don't forget the free home video if they call this number right now.
Hey, couldn't live without it. Diamond P Sports, Drag Racing 89. Hey, you want to see John Force on his head again? Better join up now.
Great job, John. Thanks.
Hey, hey, you want to do it again?
No, that was okay.
Oh, no, I got to change that.
No, you just like to talk. That was fine.
Oh, no, I got to say more things. Let's do it again.
Be proud. You did it in one take. I can't even do that.
Okay, one take? Okay, good.
Well, right now, we're going to find out who his opponent will be, and I'll tell you what, whoever wins, Richard Hartmans is going to have his hands full, Don Garlits.
Well, between John Force and Ed McCulloch, you couldn't find two finer or faster funny cars on the circuit. So he will have his hands full.
You just saw the body up. There's no problem. That's part of the regimen that Austin Cole and John Force go through. They do the burnout on one magneto, then hook up the second one. They think that helps prevent blower explosions. Or it's kind of a superstition, I think, more than anything else right now, but they're not going to change anything. John Force and Ed McCullough, with the problems Mark Oswald is having, they may be the two best funny cars on the planet right now. Here we go. Ed McCullough dead sideways, almost puts the tail into the fence. John Force goes to the final round at 550, 265 miles per hour. Let's go to Brock with Austin Coyle.
Well, Austin, a 550, not a record breaker, but that right lane seems to be giving everybody problems.
Well, in the heat we got right here and the deteriorating air conditions and all that, the main name of the game here is to stay consistent enough to get down the track. And we can probably step it up a little bit to give us a little leeway for the final.
This track doesn't want to give anybody anything, though. It looks like it's got to be a pretty conservative setup, huh?
Oh, it has to be. The guy that gets down the track will be the winner in the final.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
That Austin Coyle is one cool cat. I don't believe I've ever seen him excited about anything.
What a great funny car final this is going to be. The youngster Richard Hartman and the funny car never here before against the veteran John Force.
Before he got his helmet off, John Force ran over to the Richard Hartman car. What were you saying to them?
Because we're old match racers, that's why, and it's just good to see them old boys get to race them in the final. Nobody can lose here.
You got lane choice, and that could be a monstrous factor.
Very important. How'd she run?
5.50. You got it by 100.
Tell old Ace we was doing the deal in that round. It was great, huh? Pumped. Tired. Hey, you want to do that again? You want to do that? Nick down.
Really good job, and I've been really watching him. So when he came up and approached me, it was a dream come true.
You knew who he was.
Absolutely.
What a choice.
I think I did a great choice with Richard.
Good luck.
Thank you.
What a great combination. One of the real veterans in the business with one of the kids, and they'll be going against two old pros, John Force and his crew chief, Austin Coyle. A tough combination to beat, Big Daddy.
This should be one of the better funny car races of the day. These two cars come into this round, John Force with a 550, Richard Hartman with a 551, and Richard Hartman has not been psyched out by any of these experienced drivers, so it should be very good car racing.
Absolutely. Richard Hartman does the clutch in his car, so he knows exactly what to expect. He's a valuable crew member as well. John Force, we all left first, everybody. We're right with Force, and we've won it. John Force via the whole shot. 545 to a quicker 544. Young Hartman will be sick about that. Let's go to Brock.
Well, I tell you what, Austin, they just don't come any closer than that. It was a hell of a drag race.
Boy, I'll say, the way the conditions were, we had to step our stuff up a little, still being scared of smoking the tires, and we got it to pick up to just what we were shooting for. Our opponent apparently picked up even a little more. I believe that's his best run of the race, so our driver pulled this one out for us, winning with a slower ET. I'm sure that'll make him happier than it makes me, but the money still spends the same.
You got it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Great work, Austin Coyle.
The constant banter between Austin Coyle and John Force. It's so wonderful to listen to, Don Garland.
Well, old John Force was certainly thinking about those Winston points when that light went green, because he pulled a hole shot on young Richard Hartman. And he needed it because he ran a slower ET than that kid. But it was very, very close. The kind of race that the fans really like to see. In the comparison, we see it. .488 for Force and a .517 for Hartman. And that's what won the race.
No sooner than these race cars stopped, both drivers started screaming, "Who won? Who won?" John Force, you won.
That was close. Hey, since the snake, I ain't had a kid make me that nervous before. Terrible. I must be getting old, I guess.
This is the greatest year you've ever had, and we've only run 7 out of 19 races.
Well, we moved up in second, and yeah, it's going to be a long old season, but you know, what can I say again? Jolly Rancher, Castrol, Easy Wider, Wax Help, all the people behind me all supported this car, especially my family, my wife, and Austin Coyle.
And you won in a hole shot, even sweeter.
A hole shot, I can't believe it. I thought I was late. I can't hardly talk, it's those braces again. I thought I was late.
You weren't late.
What was the time?
45 to a 44.
45 to a 40. He ran quicker?
Yeah.
Coyle, where's he at?
He'll be down here soon. Let's go to Top Fuel. Brock, Don?
You do, you'll be out.
Okay, thanks, Rich.
Trying to grab that 10th could also end up in loss of traction. Those huge tires designed to operate at an elevated temperature. That's the reason for those long burnouts that we have been watching on each and every car. The body coming up on force, and crew chief Austin Coyle reaches inside the car to remove a wire, which in turn activates the second magneto on the race engine, and now force is ready to go. Art Hendy, having made the final checks of his race car, is staging in the bar lane. He qualified number 8, beat Whit Bazemore in the first round, while Force, from his number 1 qualifying spot with a 5.30, defeated Wyatt Radke in first round racing. On board with John Force as he approaches the starting line in the final staging procedures. Both drivers taking it very carefully. And it's a red light for Hendy. He left the starting line too soon, and that's a gimme for John Force. He still ran through with a 5:51 elapsed time at only 254 miles an hour. Hendy, knowing that Force had the better car, tried to make an advantage at the starting line, but paid the price.
It is my pleasure to introduce to you the new leader in Winston points in the funny car category, John Force. How about it, John?
Well, that's really something, Steve. It's only taken 18 years to get one shot at this. Actually, the first time I've ever been in the lead, but I think the biggest thing that scares me, my crew's doing very well, my sponsors are pleased, but to see what Larson did when the pressure gets on, and I can imagine right here he had an edge. We're going to have an edge down the road to get it again, and it's scary when the big money's out, that pressure's put on you.
Larson red-lighted, Hendy red-lighted. Could some of this be heat-induced?
Well, I tell you what, yeah, there's a lot of heat, but there's a lot of points, and then McCullough fell and everybody fell, and old Coyle always makes me laugh. He looked in the window and gave me a kiss before I left, and let's go home if we get whooped, and it's working for us. How'd she run?
She ran 5:55.
We'll take it.
Steve, it really was a 5:51, and I'm sure John will like that even better. Riding along with him inside that Castrol Special. This has become quite a rivalry since Casey Spurlock at the wheel of a Nitro Funny Car for the first time in competition beat John Force in February at the Winter Nationals. They've been at each other's throats. Steve?
We've been saying for, 6 months now that this man, Jim White, is just a winner looking for a place to do it. It may be today.
Roland and Wes and the guys have done an excellent job tuning the car. We're real proud to be in the final round, that's for sure.
And a red light by Mark Oswald. Did you see that, and could you believe that?
I didn't see it, although he was out there on me, and we've raced a lot, and usually I get the lead first with those guys, so maybe that reaction time is starting to pay off a little bit, and they're starting to take some chances with us.
Like a third base coach in baseball, Austin Coyle, the crew chief for John Force, relaying by hand signals how he wants John to leave the starting line. Casey Spurlock is already staged. Now Force is ready. And Spurlock smokes the tires. Force into the finals for the second race in a row. Spurlock trying for a quicker elapsed time. Maybe too much power, a little too much clutch. Either way, he crossed over that very thin line and lost traction. The 5.46 second ET by Force gives him the lane choice over Jim White in the Budweiser Spring Nationals Funny Car Finals. We'll be back with Force as we look on. Force having completed his burnout, getting set to stage for the Budweiser Spring Nationals Finals in Funny Car. His competition going through the same procedures on the far side of the track. Jim White at the wheel of Roland Leong's Dodge. As Steve noted earlier, Jim White has had the performance to be a winner. He has yet, though, to take home an NHRA National Event title. Force laps the stage. White gathering it in the far lane, but look at Force. And low ET of eliminations, a 5:37. John Force overcoming the starting line advantage that was gained by Jim White. His speed, 275 miles an hour. John Force, for the second race in a row and the third of the season, takes home the victory. As we watch in replay, the reaction timer showed us that Jim White had nearly 0.04 of a second advantage off the starting line, but John Force's Oldsmobile had made that up quickly. As they passed the midpoint, Force was pulling ahead, and then at the finish line, the timer stopped with a 5:37.
John Force has owned this Budweiser Spring National since the moment this car rolled out of the trailer in qualifying. Now John Lowe, elapsed time of the day at 5:37. She's yours again. He got you up the mark a little bit, though.
Oh, he's tricky over there, you little beauty. You scared the hell out of me, Wes. What can I say? Only took 18 years to stumble down this road and win a drag race. Got to give it to my sponsors, first of all, Castro, Jolly Rancher, Easy Wider, the Wax Shop, all of them people, just like you read it on a car, especially Austin Coil. My crew, what can you do without them? Same old lines, I've read it, and I'm saying them again, but it's got to be said. But most of all, a baby girl was born here 2 years ago on his Father's Day, and I've done it again. How's that?
Ever any doubt in your mind, any round today?
From the very beginning. Yesterday, Coyle said, we are dead meat here today. And I said, well, buddy, that's what I paid you for. Go out there and fix this old heap so we can all keep our jobs. And he did it, but he had me worried. He changed blowers in the final. He turned around and he said, old Roland over there and them old boys are going to get real tricky. And it worked. What can I say? It stepped up.
3 races this year, the Winston points lead, the greatest year ever for the Brute one, John Force.
I want to say to my guys, no more Wednesday night match racing. It's a deal we made.
Oh, boy. Well, they love to hear that.
Steve, not only did John Force dominate the racing, he dominated that conversation, too. Our congratulations to John Force.
Yeah, so he's not worrying about him.
Well, that may be inevitable. You see the body coming down on the John Force automobile. His opponent will be Casey Spurlock in the far lane. Spurlock, of course, won the opening race, the first race he ever ran in a Nitro Funny car, the Winter Nationals in California, back in February. One of the cars he had to beat was John Force, who you are now on board with. Let's quickly go to the starting line and get Brock and Don's thoughts on the Force versus Spurlock confrontation coming.
Well, Don, this is kind of an interesting matchup. Of course, John Force is running real strong, has been all season. But Casey Spurlock is a surprise. He's come on real well this season.
Well, he's certainly the winningest rookie in NHRA history. But Force has been very steady. Qualified with a 542, run a 542 in the first round. And that's as good as anybody's running right now. If he can continue that type of performance, he will be hard to beat all day long. Spurlock, he could come up with a good run, but, I don't anticipate that right now.
Okay. Do you think we got any difference in the lanes right now?
No, the lanes are dead even.
The John Force has already had one confrontation today, and that was on the starting line in full view of everybody with his own crew chief, Austin Coyle. But they're kind of like siblings, They have those rivalries, and they like to argue a little bit. Keeps everybody on edge, John Force, you know what edge means. Now, Casey Spurlock, Hendersonville, Tennessee, comes from a racing family, sprint cars primarily, but he's chose the straightaway path.
And done very, very well, surprisingly well. As we said earlier, the victor, the first time out ever in a funny car, as we once again look through the windshield of John Force as he moves into position. Austin Coyle not shaking his fist at him there, just waving him into position, and we're ready for a start here at San Air.
Spurlock, the beautiful yellow car. Force, the green and white car. You're on board with John Force. Where's Spurlock? He's behind by half a car length, but what a drag race. 5.40 to a 5.45. The big speed, though, belonged to the loser, Casey Spurlock, 260 miles per hour. Boy, when those two get together, it is never disappointing. John Force is driving through the shutdown area like a road racer, heating up his tires.
Yeah, so when he makes the turnoff, he won't slip off into the ditch. Beautiful start here on the two cars. Left almost dead even. But Force gains just a little bit in the initial race. And I'll tell you, that's what he needed, because Spurlock's car began to come on at the very end, and he runs 260 miles an hour, but it wasn't enough.
Just before you turned off here, you made kind of a false turn at the guardrail. What were you doing?
Oh, just checking out the front end. Looking for you guys.
You found us.
John Force getting ready to go into the semifinals. It's going to be an interesting one. Jim White versus John Force. And Force has really been something to be reckoned with this season, Don Garland.
Force has ran very consistent, and he's been very consistent at this race. And White ran a 5:38 in qualifying, but he has not performed like that on race day, not even once. So I got an idea that Force is really the power here.
The body up of the Force car, Austin Coyle always does that to nab the wires to the second magneto. You know, and Austin Coyle spent a whole lot of John Force's money testing this car. As Force said earlier this year, he left a trail of molten aluminum from Michigan to California. But here's where it has paid off. They are starting to win races.
Well, you bet Roland Leon, the crew chief over on the Hawaiian car, has certainly reached into the bag and tried to get that combination for that earlier 538 I told you about. Because this is what he's going to need to beat Force, because he comes in with a 540 from the round before.
Look at Force, a little twitchy on the wheel. Gets a hold of the brake, holding that car. Force finally stages. Force and White. Great start. John Force driving that car as straight as it can be done. And John Force drives it right into the final round with a 546 at 267 miles per hour. The testing that team did earlier this year, as I said, is paying off in a big, big way.
White takes a beautiful starting line advantage. He really wanted to get John, but the power began to fall off as he went down course, and he didn't run as well as he ran the round before. And you can see Force's car just building distance all the way down. Takes the win handily from Tim White.
Okay, that sets up the funny car final. John Force versus Mark Oswald. Oswald lane choice. Let's go to Steve.
John, I'm starting to lose count of how many finals you've been in this year, and you're headed into another one. What a season.
Starting to make me real nervous. She trucked out there pretty good, and I seen that old punch bowl come around me, and I had to step off the gas for a second. She shook me hard, and it recovered and drove around him, but obviously he had some trouble. What'd she run?
She ran a 46. You've lost lane choice to Mark Oswald.
Well, I was beginning to wonder if that other lane was better, but we're excited, and it's doing what we thought it'd do, and give it to my guys. They did a good job.
Well, Gary Ormsby's 505 tells you that lane has got to be pretty good.
505 in the right lane.
In the left-hand lane.
Well, we'll take it either way. Maybe my crew chief there just overpowered her a little.
Maybe so.
And you know he'll give it everything he's got, whichever lane. We'll be back for all the pro class finals.
What was your evening like last night?
Long. Couldn't sleep, ate late. We were out here and actually got up early this morning feeling rather good and come out, and I've been walking the track for about an hour.
And after that interview, John and Austin Coyle walked the track one more time. They did not have lane choice. And they knew without asking Oswald that they would be in the near lane. So, today, Mark Oswald has put John Force in the near lane, the lane that was oiled down for this all-important funny car final. Don Garland.
But I do have to say that gave NHRA a lot of time last night to clean that lane up. It wouldn't surprise me if the lane isn't better than the other lane. In fact, I told John if he got that lane last night when they were cleaning it up, to just pull over a little bit and it would be just fine.
Run a little out of the groove intentionally?
Yes.
You know, Big, I want to be your agent. We'll open a little booth back in the pit that says Big Daddy Speaks or something. Let's start selling this information. You're giving it away.
Sounds like a good idea, Steve.
Just kidding, folks. Oh, and the iron he is, Mark Oswald is the one that loses traction. John Force, a marvelous job of driving. 540, 267 miles an hour in the lane that was thought to be inferior.
Well, just like I told you, the lane was all right after they cleaned it up. So John Force, he kept his cool. He made a beautiful start, took a starting line advantage, pulled over just a little bit to the right as he got down course. You can see, blew a little dust on the edge of the track. There was rice ash blowing around his headers over. You can see it. And moved down there just fine with a 540. A very good time. As good a time as he had run earlier in the race. And now he's the champion. Let's go down with Steve, who's with John right now.
I have to tell you, this was a joint effort on the part of a fine driver and a great crew chief, because this was a brand new racetrack, right, John Force?
Brand new racetrack. It was good. Coyle and I, we walked it for about an hour, and we was looking around. And Garland said last night, he told Coyle, obviously, you got to leave the start line and drive her over on the fence and stay out of that groove if you can in the deal. And Coyle said, yeah, that might put you up against the wall, but it worked. Just like driving an old diesel truck, huh?
Hey. Good job, Austin.
And we got to thank Steve Gibbs and the Safety Safari crew for doing one hell of a job of fixing that oil down lane and prepping the track here in the mist this morning.
Yeah, they did a fine job. But how about this guy? You guys fight a lot, but you can't today.
This guy's the best there is, but I'm tired of telling him his head gets too big.
Is that true, John?
Hey, fight a lot. You should have been there first round and get Densham. Yesterday we had the big Duke out and Coyle quit on the starting line. I said, you can't quit me. You ain't even paid yet.
All right, some real celebration on the John Force team. No doubt about that. But we've got...
Tell us more about that. Here's Steve Evans. Well, Don, the upset started raging earlier today in round number 1 of funny car competition. And it began with that man, Tom Hoover, at the wheel of the family funny car from the Minneapolis area. He was up against John Force, the points leader in the category, the winner of 3 races this year, including the last 2. And any fan that assumed that Tom Hoover just came here for the fun of it was dead wrong. At the finish line, it was a race neither driver could call from the cockpit.
Yeah, I don't like those. It makes it tough, but he's a good racer, and he did well, and I don't even know what happened. Our car ran good enough to win a race. It's just he come back from where he was and stepped up on it.
Now, Tom Hoover will quickly tell...
Watch Julie come at us. I figured out just what the people on the starting line in Englishtown were thinking.
Okay, back at round 2 funny car action. John Force, you're looking over his shoulder right now as he does his burnout. He'll go against Bruce Larson. But now, let's go to Jim White at the far end, who just set low ET of the meet.
He's trying to carve the number 1 off of Bruce's car and put it on this machine. And a tip of the hat to Mark O'Gara, our in-car camera coordinator. These are the finest pictures we have ever seen.
I'll tell you, it looks like you are inside the car and actually going to make the run. This is what you actually see, folks, when these cars race.
And watch how this body contorts. It's a shame we can't give you the G feeling off of the starting line. Boy, that would be a technical G, but they're staged and ready. You're riding along with John Force. Do you see Larson? No, you don't, and neither did John Force. 5:59 at 2:54 defeats Larson's 5:56. Larson again ran quicker than John Force, and again he lost the reaction time war.
Well, it looks like it's going to be you against old Federley.
It does appear that way, doesn't it? It'll probably be a pretty good race here, and you know, we got to do whatever we can here, and it's kind of tough running up here on the mountain, little practice as we get, but Force helped us out on that one, huh?
Johnny did a good job.
He certainly did.
Well, he sure did. They beat Bruce Larson on the starting line with a much, much better reaction time, Don Garlits.
You know, it's such a difference, a full 1/10 of a second in the reaction time. And you see that clutch dust? I think that Larson was having some kind of clutch problem to be that late. He's a better driver than that. But Force's car was performing flawlessly, and especially John as a driver. Look at him make up the distance there. He just keeps going on and on. Very nice win for John.
So, let's go to John Force with Steve Evans at the far end.
I tell you what, every time Bruce Larson races John Force, he runs quicker, but Force beats him anyway. He's going to get sick and tired of seeing you.
I tell you what, I told Austin up there, when he got lane choice, I was standing on the hill, just made me sick. And I told Austin we're going to get him on the light, and it's tough because you got to get out there and you got to get aggressive. I was scared to death, and I kept telling myself, get tough, and get this champ. And I was giving him all I had on that stage lights, and it worked, I guess.
Your 59 beat his 56. I'll say it worked.
We'll take it. Thanks.
What a lever.
So John Force just wins it on the starting line. Is he happy? Absolutely. He will move on to the final cars. This is John Force. There you see going against Ed McCullough. And I'll tell you what, Don Garlits, this is going to be a race and a half.
Well, you got a couple of titans up there now, and I'll tell you, neither one wants to give an inch, like an irresistible force and an immovable object.
They're both pre-staged. We're looking at McCullough here. He doesn't seem anxious at all to move forward. Neither does John Force. A little mind game going on. The starter in the red and white, that's Buster Capps. McCullough got an eagle eye from Buster, immediately moved in, and we've got a race. John Force sees McCullough's blade. John Force has been beat. A winning 5:53, a losing 5:56.
Just getting stronger and stronger.
Yeah, it was a real important round.
Joe Fasano's car, driven by Glenn Mycroft. In the other lane, the man we were just talking about, the leader in the championship, 4-time winner this season. This is John Force at the wheel of the Castrol Oldsmobile. Force qualified here in the number 2 spot at a 5:35. He beat Wyatt Radke in round 1, while Mycroft qualified 7th. His elapsed time was 5:42. His victim in round number 1 was Big Jim Dunn. Mycroft now through the burnout procedure and into staging.
This car recently repainted a magnificent candy apple red, standing out here in the bright Northern California sunshine. John Force wanting to continue his quest for his first ever Winston title. Close race, and John Force hits the parachute and the fuel shut off, pulling on the brake as we rode along with him on that victory over Glenn Micras. His elapsed time, 5:46 at a speed of 272. As we watch again from the outside, you can see that Force was very late, giving the initial lead to Micras. Remember all the movements that John Force was making with the steering wheel, necessary to keep the car in the center of the lane. He overcame the lead by Micras right at the finish line for the victory.
It ran a 5:46, John.
No lane choice. We're excited. I just wish some of these other guys would give us some help. Coletta let me down there. This point steel's tough, and you need these guys to pick off Larson and McCullough. Somebody. Don't lay it all on me.
The red light-itis has got him.
He got something, but Mickers, old Paisano's guy, he gave me a driving job up there. I don't know what happened, but he moved on me. I couldn't believe it. I had my stuff together and trying to be aggressive, but better get a whole lot tougher. Stay away from them Oreo cookies, huh?
Steve, I think I figured out the secret of John Force. You just don't breathe when you talk. It just rolls out of the day in funny car. As far as the Winston point standings is concerned, it will be Ed McCullough, who is second at the moment, to John Force. That's his opponent in this Final Four matchup. Earlier, Steve had a chance to take a look at just part of the opening ceremonies. Well, it's now on that same starting line where Steve was earlier. We're ready for the Final Four race between John Force and Ed McCullough. Austin Coyle, the crew chief for Force, pulling him into the staging beams. He'll give him some hand signals, not much. That means there's lots of traction there, and Force getting himself ready to challenge McCullough. Both drivers taking their time about staging. The first to come into the beams, Ed McCullough. Now Force lets the brake off. And McCullough up in smoke. Force with a driving jump. Heads down the quarter mile to the victory. And a 5.54 second elapsed time. His speed, 265 miles an hour. In beating Ed McCullough, John Force earns an additional 200 points and remains in competition as one half of the championship round. Here now.
I tell you, that was one great job of driving, John. The car is skating all over your lane.
Talk about talking to God, talking to Austin Coyle. I'm cussing the front ends up. That son of a gun's going toward the center line. I thought, she's over, baby. You're going to cross and ram this little beauty. And she just settled down and come back off. Thank God. God. This is getting painful. No shoot.
I'm done, Dave. Well, Steve, obviously John Force is not done. Looks like a shadow boxer as he receives the congratulations of his crew. He is into the championship round to race one of these two drivers. A victory this season. Bruce Larson challenging the man that is leading the points chase, John Force. This is the funny car final here at the California Nationals. Bruce Larson rolling all the way nearly to the starting line before he starts his burnout. He wants the rubber right down in the area where he'll be leaving the line. John Force smoking in the inside of that race car as he grabs the brake handle to bring it to a stop after the burnout. Well, if they run like Darrell Alderman, it is certainly going to be a competitive class, as if it wasn't already. John Force is certainly a strong competitor, and as we saw a bit earlier, he's definitely on a roll here at Sears Point International Raceway. Force has gotten his final instructions from Austin Coyle. For Bruce Larson, he selected the near lane. He had a 5:36 in the previous round. Let's ride with John Force on this run. John having to drive just a bit. Down across the finish line first in the championship to John Force at a 5.44 second elapsed time. His speed, 270 miles an hour. John Force wins the Motorcraft Ford California Nationals, and as we look again in replay, he did it in fine style. Force reacting first to the starting light. He got off the starting line well ahead of Bruce Larson. Then as they traveled down track, he extended that lead. The victory, a 5.44 second win to a losing 5:47. Steve?
Well, John, as he picks up his $300 trick sunglasses, You've done it again. You've done it again.
It's amazing. It's great to do it here. And
listen to those fans.
To do it here in California, and you got to whip up on these guys when they give you the break. Without the sponsors, we know it. Here we are again, Casserole, Jolly Rancher, Easy Wider, the Wax Shop. I love all these people that support us. Give the deal to the crew. Austin Coyle's great. My crew's great, but I got to tell you something. Mooneyham, you're out there somewhere. We sacrificed your parts today, and my bill's running up. But that baby right into the lights before she blew the blower off her. But it was good running. Thank you.
Mooneyham, who builds the blowers. The big difference in this car was its top-end charge.
It came on. Coyle said he was going to give her some down there at the other end. And she went out, and all of a sudden she jerked the front end up. And I said, oh, talk to me, baby. But yesterday we sacrificed the blower and banged it, and I was crying about the parts bill. And she let another one go.
He's got plenty of money tonight to buy more than one supercharger.
Steve, the first time I've ever seen John Force smiling about a broken part, but it came in the final round as he won the championship of this California National.
Now, this car has put 2 drivers in that club.
And certainly, the highlight of funny car qualifying here in Kent, Washington, was John Force, who, as Dave mentioned, won the last race in Sears Point, California. Force just obliterated the track record at 5:22. And speaking again of John Force and crew, things are not perfect here. He had low ET in round number 1 at 5:33 over Jim Murphy, but they're having to feed this car a brand new supercharger each and every run. It has a very short fuse, and just before the finish line, it blows that first panel out. The fire then gets all the spark plug wires and occasionally some of their computer wiring. Having to put a new blower on is not an idyllic situation. It can ruin your consistency, and that's what's been winning for John Force. David?
Ed McCulloch is now headed to the Final Four. Coming back after his long, smoky burnout, this is Tom Hoover. The entire Hoover family on hand as always to try to guide their son to the winner's circle. The Pontiac Trans Am bodied car of Hoover qualified in the 9th spot with a 5:45 elapsed time. He beat Glenn Micris in round number 1. John Force driving his Castrol Oldsmobile to the number 1 qualifying position with that brilliant 5:22, beat Jim Murphy in his first round race. John Force coming into the staging themes. Alongside of him, Tom Hoover going through the same procedure. Force the last to stage. He is ready. A good start by both drivers. Hoover having some problems, and John Force thundering across the finish line with you on board. Runs at a elapsed time of 5:39. His speed 258 miles an hour. Back at the starting line, the engine is idling.
For the first time in a few runs, that burst plate and that blower belt are still on John Force's supercharger. But, John, it may have been because you clicked it off just a little early.
Well, I didn't see Hoover at all, and Coyle said save her because she's got a short wick on her, and it's kind of tough when you're trying to outrun these guys, and the crew chief, he's got to try to outrun a race motor, and that's what Coyle's doing. He's doing a real good job.
5:39. Everybody else so far has run quicker than that in this round.
She fell off, but she had low there in the first, and I wanted to click it early to give my guys a little bit of break between rounds so they had a chance to look over little things and let Coyle have a time to think what he's going to do.
Give your pocketbook a break. Those blowers aren't cheap.
Yeah, I hear you there.
Steve, John constantly keeps the costs in mind. Well, it's Seattle International Raceway. And it's time for the Final Four of Funny Car. This is John Force, the quickest car on the grounds today at a 5:22. His competition, Mark Oswald. Earlier, Steve had a chance to take a look at the burnout's completed as John Force. That is Austin Coyle. You see through the front window. He is guiding and directing John towards the starting line. The car rolling forward ever so slowly. In the opposite lane, Mark Oswald doing the same. Two of the best funny cars in the world. The winner here goes on to the championship round. A good start for Force. A little bit of smoke off the tires. Oswald pulls ahead and wins the race. Mark Oswald, a 5:37, upsets the low qualifier and Winston points leader and goes into the championship round. As we look again, you can see that Force in the near lane got the advantage off the starting line. But that disappeared into a cloud of tire smoke as he lost traction ever so briefly. That was enough to allow Oswald to pull ahead, where Mark in the far lane stayed ahead by more than a wheel length, taking the victory. Steve Evans.
David, we're looking at a man who has had very little sleep. John Force's crew chief, Austin Coyle. You'll recall we told you in Seattle that the Winston points leader was having supercharger problems. Well, they continued here at Brainerd. Even though yesterday in the first session of qualifying he grabbed the #1 spot, he blew a supercharger up again, and the crew said, hey, this has got to stop. They came back to the trailer, and they changed the entire engine combination, trying to get more fuel out of the engine at the far end of the racetrack. To say that that new combination didn't work would be a gross understatement. You're looking at the remains of a horrific funny car fire. The car left the start.
Big, and I just leaned on it too hard. Probably driver error there. I should have got out of it. And it was up, and it just went up, and it banged so quick. And I didn't think it lit at first. And then I was on the brakes and didn't get no burns, only got hurt. I just finally ran out of time. I had to get out the window. Hey, the fans got their money's worth, huh? It's just an old bulldog fight's what it is, and we got bulldogged.
Fortunately, when these blower problems first started to occur, John Force added a spare body to his parts inventory, something they don't usually carry. And it's a good thing, because with all-night labor on the part of the crew, they were able to get back into action instead of being on the sideline, losing more and more points as the rounds went by. As it was earlier today in round #1, it was Force victorious at 5:41 over Whit Bazemore, and no blower problems.
The supplier
We'll be seeing
of that JP1 nitro engine to many of the racers here. Micros qualified in the #9 spot at a 5:56 and beat Casey Spurlock in an upset in round 1. Force, the #1 qualifier with a 5:33. Whit Bazemore, his first round victim. The two Oldsmobile-bodied funny cars approaching the starting line so gingerly, getting themselves set just right. Micros couldn't wait. He leaves the red light on the starting line and pops the supercharger. John Force lurching his way down track. Now he's smoking the tires. He obviously does not realize that Micros had red lighted as Force stood on the throttle again and smoked the tires through in not a picture-perfect run, but certainly a crowd-pleasing one. John Force advancing to the final 4, but without the time that would give him lane choice. Let's watch this run again. Here's Micros. He left the starting line too soon. That red light disqualifying him. Force goes up in smoke. What a break for him. And to add injury to insult, Micros explodes a supercharger at half track. In the top fuel pit area, now let's go down to the far end of the racetrack and Steve.
Obviously, John Force didn't know that Glenn Micros had red lighted, or you wouldn't have dirt tracked that funny car down here.
I tell you what, I told Coyle right before the run, I said, Coyle, when McCullough won, I said, this is when fate steps in. And I thought, God, how could I ever be that late? And I smoked the tires and it was over because he was trucking. And then I saw fire and I chased that baby down. What a break. Did I catch him?
Oh, yeah, you counted him down.
Boy, talk about it.
He was so busy driving, he didn't know that he passed him.
That was so much fun, I couldn't even believe it because he was rolling. That was a real great white knuckler there, buddy.
Dave, I'm done.
Steve, you were finished before you ever started. Dave McClellan along with Steve Evans. And it may be cloudy and cool, but the action this weekend at Brainerd International Raceway has been incredibly hot. Let's take a look again on the qualifying run by John Force when the engine let go. Force thought it was all over, and then all of a sudden a ball of fire erupted out from underneath his Oldsmobile. The fire began to come into the cockpit as Force fought the car, burning off speed, trying to get it slowed so he could bring it to a stop. There was one thing on Force's mind, that was getting out of that inferno. The NHRA Safety Safari already was on the scene, pouring water on the Oldsmobile as it was rolling to a stop. Force came out of the emergency hatch and hit the ground hard. You know that he has got to be paying that price today. He's got to be stiff and sore as he is staging in the far lane to race Jim White in the Final 4 here at the North Star Nationals. It was the run previous when Force lost traction against Glenn Micros that cost him a shot at lane choice. But it makes no difference. Force wins it. A lot of smoke out of the engine, but no fire this time. His elapsed time of 5:32 at 263 miles an hour. White faded to a 5:45 at 268. Force into the finals of the North Star Nationals. John Force. Steve?
Dave, John Force came out of the car, obviously in pain. NHRA's emergency people here. You okay, John?
No, that's a shoulder. when I fell out yesterday, and every time you hit the shoes, boy, it grabs you. They looked at it last night. There was nothing wrong. It's just bruised. We're fine.
As Joe says,
John Force
tuned him to the winner's circle yet once again. The crew chiefs in funny car just as important in Top Fuel. And just before this round, Steve had a chance to talk with both of them.
Well, in this constant crew chief versus crew chief battle, it's you against Bertie Federley, only you got a problem he didn't have.
Well, we've had a lot of trouble coming back from the fire we had yesterday that, of course, destroyed a bunch of the control systems as well as just the motor. And we've got it pretty close to being sorted out, but this last run, although we ran good enough to have lane choice in the final, one of the jets that we have open on the starting line that's supposed to close didn't, and of course that made the motor way too lean, and it just blacked the crankshaft, which is not too serious, but enough to where we got to change motors.
We feel real confident going into this final. I mean, they're we're giving them a lot of credit for their performance ability, but we think we can step this thing right up. So we're feeling real good about going into this final.
Austin Coyle, plagued with so many problems already this weekend, talks about adding another to the list, that of blacking the crankshaft. That's an overload, an overheating of the crankshaft journal, which makes it unusable until repairs are made. Now Force staging in the far lane, as is McCulloch in the near lane. Both taking their time. They're set. A tremendous start. And a close race. John Force wins it by just a couple of feet. The times of 5:38 at 269 miles an hour for the winner. McCulloch with the starting line advantage could not find the power. His losing time of 5:43. Look at the start. McCulloch had about 2/100ths of a second advantage. Then as they got closer to half track, John Force continued to maintain his lead. But by the time they came to the finish line, McCulloch was trying to pull up alongside until he just ran out of racetrack.
Well, I'll tell you, after that fire yesterday and looking at this car, I've seen sicker dogs get well, but not very many, and not this well, John.
Well, I haven't got all the news. The sponsors, Castrol, Jolly Rancher, Oldsmobile, for giving us a great race car, Easy Wider, the Wax Shop. All these people are important. I did a good job driving the day. But what I want to say is, you guys come here. This is the hardest bunch of troopers I've ever had. We burnt the car up. We built the fuel tanks up. We did everything you could do to bring it back. A motor every round. And this is the best group, led by Austin Coyle, Bob Fisher, Butterfield, Harmson, Finn, and my newest, Stan Finn, my newest guy here, Morgan. And these guys are great, because you know what? It was almost over down there. Everybody was beat. And I just didn't think they could hang on much longer. I was sleeping in the lounge. I got to tell you the truth. I was beat. You did a good job. I thank all of you guys.
You did too, man.
And winning has made almost all the pain go away in that shoulder, unless, of course, beating him on the back brings it back.
It's the pain in the checkbook that'll take a little while to heal after this.
They did leave a trail of smoldering parts here at Brainerd.
Steve, the old adage, winning is everything, best describes this moment. John Force.
There's problems on Casey Spurlock's car. The body is up, the crew running back to the truck. If you look closely, underneath the car, you see that big brown puddle? That's oil coming out of the engine. Obviously an unsafe condition. Starter Buster Couchover giving the word to Casey, shut it off. And what a tough break for him. He is out now in round number 1. And much like Ed McCulloch a year ago, he can do nothing but sit and watch as John Force takes a single to advance to the Final Four. Throughout this past season, Force in the Castrol Oldsmobile qualified in the top spot 8 times. Spurlock walking back to the pit area. You know he has got to be disappointed. John Force just obliterates the competition. His elapsed time of 5:33 at 266 miles an hour. By 7/100ths of a second, the quick time of this first round of eliminations of the Big Bud Shootout. On John Force's car. Let's go down to Steve Evans.
Well, David, we got a bit of a fire brewing here in the blower manifold of John Force. Immediately they're over to put it out. Force was screaming to get a fire extinguisher over here. here. And apparently the burst panel blew out of the thing. We heard it bang right in the lights. John is not real happy, but I think he'll be happy when he hears the ET anyway. 533, John.
It's okay. That's what we expected. Need a little help down here, whatever. Just got a break there with him and just had a chance to go for it, but snake's back. It's biting us.
They've been having a lot of supercharger problems. They thought they had them cured. Apparently not.
Steve, that could spell disaster for Force's hopes to become a repeat champion. He won it back in 1987, was runner-up a year ago.
Burns up everything. I can't even get my car back.
While John Force and his crew have to solve the final round. And the question is, can either Force or McCulloch run quicker than that 540 laid down by Larson? Austin Goyle, the crew chief, looking in. He gives us the okay sign. It's time to go racing. They've got the engine repaired, back together. The crewman underneath the rear of the body on Ed McCulloch's car. Obviously, that's where the switch is for the electronic onboard recording device. He's now turned it on, exits the area as McCulloch heads into the staging beam. These two drivers just one race away from a shot at a $50,000 run. Tremendous race. John Force is into the finals of the Big Bud Shootout. His elapsed time, 5.40269. McCulloch trailed with a 541, but the important point here is that John Force, by 0.06 of a second, has lane choice over Bruce Larson in the finals. Let's ride along in replay with John Force. Question is, does he still have the problem? And the answer is yes. You saw just a very slight pop indicating to John that the difficulty continues with his supercharger system. But in spite of that, he is in the finals of the Big Bud Shootout for the second year in a row, racing Bruce Larson. Steve?
Now that's my fire crew. Thank you. Thank you. Saved her.
John, I heard another little pop right at the finish line.
It's going to be this way to the end of the war, I guess. But, man, I tell you, I don't know if I'm starting to hear things because I'm getting old, but I heard McCulloch right out my window. I don't know.
You weren't hearing things.
Well, what was I hearing? I don't know. He was.
When you run a 540 to his 41, he is right there.
He was right there. I tell you, I was shaking on the starting line, and we're going to need some of this Bud money to pay this deal back. But most of all, the fire crew, they were here with me, and give my guys some time to get this thing fixed again.
The damage not nearly as bad this time, Dave, as it was in round one.
Steve, that's good news on the starting line at Indianapolis Raceway Park. This is the showdown of the Big Bud Shootout. Bruce Larson is in the far lane. In the near lane, John Force. The advantage went to Force in the previous round by 0.06 of a second. We're dealing with race cars running over 270 miles an hour. The final staging procedures completed. And Force has another blower explosion. This time the car is on fire. Down the racetrack he goes. He attempts to burn off speed, gets close to the guardrail. The car continuing to burn. The cockpit filling up with smoke as John Force tries to get that car stopped. The in-car camera just dissolved into nothingness as the flames hit it. Force trying to get the emergency hatch open on the roof. He does. He comes up out of the cloud of smoke, pulls off his gloves, and starts to get off the race car. He appears to be okay, but incredibly, looks like he's taking his time. Now he is helped off the top of the burning car as the fire truck arrives on the scene. Let's go back and replay and live it once again. As John Force neared the finish line, at that exact moment, the supercharger let go. He rode out that burning ball of flame all the way to the end of this very lengthy racetrack. From inside the car, you have an opportunity to see just what John Force coped with. There was the explosion, and here came the fire. Continuing well over a half a mile into the shutdown area, John Force was battling his race car in the flames all the way. The fire consumed our onboard camera. You know how hot it had to be as Force fought back with all the talent and skill he had. As the car neared the...
Holy shit, Batman.
John.
I'm fine.
Okay.
What a chicken! I'm worried about
John
you.
Forrest crawls out of a blazing inferno to celebrate winning the Big Bud Shootout
Cars they got in the world.
with John Gardella, one of the people that have been behind this team. Forrest,
Keep it off the fence.
you might have just spent 50 to win 50.
Was that good or what? Yeah. That's okay. I only bumped the guardrail once. It's okay. You're okay, man. I used the fire bottles. Good driving. All right. You got him this time. And I had my foot out her when she blew. Tell him to do the same thing.
John, you've been living with this threat of fire every run for 2 races.
Exciting, ain't it?
And all year long, it's been a real dogfight in the funny car division. For that story, let's go to Steve Evans.
Charlie, there has been a battle going all year long for the season-end funny car championship between Ed McCullough and that man, John Force. But here at Indianapolis, Force's biggest enemy is not McCullough. It's his own race car, because it is trying to hurt him. For some unknown reason, the machine has a very, very short fuse. It will run quicker than any other car here, but right at the finish line, it explodes. At the last race in Brainerd, Minnesota, this was John Force qualifying. A tremendous engine explosion. John was unhurt other than a singed fire suit and a bruised shoulder. The crew worked all night putting a new body on the car and put him in the winner's circle come Sunday. No one thought that that drama could be topped. Until yesterday. This was John Force winning $50,000 in the Big Bud Shootout, but again, a four-wheel volcano. Now, you would think that all of that would get John down. You obviously don't know the one they call brute force.
Next to win an Indy in the World Championship, this is the next best thing, and if we won, I took my foot out and she popped, but my job was to keep her off the wall, and I'm real excited about it.
Now you've got a crew with a lot of work ahead of them. The finals of the U.S. Nationals coming tomorrow.
I got a crew with a lot of heart. We got a brand new car. This chassis is fine. I kept her off the fence. I finally did my job for once. I even hit the fire bottles. It was great. Somebody ought to give Coyle oxygen, because they ain't as bad as he thinks.
And as John Force began his never-ending celebration with the crowd, the crew once again went to work. And under the moonlit Indiana skies, like the Phoenix, yet another funny car rose from the ashes. While the car was being repaired, did the crew happen to find the problem? Apparently not. Up against Jim Murphy in round 1 earlier today, Force won. Again, a blower bank at the finish line, a relatively small fire. No big problem. The problem may come in round number 2 when John goes head-to-head with Ed McCullough. And you know, there's an even tighter points battle going on in the top fuel
If we're going to do
category.
anything in this championship, we have to win right now. That's what we intend to do.
McCullough says this is the showdown, one-on-one here now.
Well, it's a long ways to the World Championship, but ain't no psych job going to work on me today. Been too rough. We're going to race our own lane, and like Snake said, when you're on a roll, you're on a roll, and we ain't out of dead cats yet, but kind of like all I can say to Ed is he's my buddy. Just don't be late to work.
John Force referring to his personal hero, drag racing legend Don the Snake Prudhomme. By the way, we have no idea who the dead cats are.
I think he's 9 lives of a cat. I speak a little 4 C's. That's what I interpreted out of that. But here is John Force and Ed McCullough. John Force, number 6 in the world a year ago, wants to improve to number 1, and you're going to ride with him as he races McCullough.
Tremendous pressure here on both drivers. I would have to say there would be more pressure on John Force because he has had the fires and he's leading the points. He has more to lose.
There was a great start for Force, but he lost traction. That opens the door for McCullough. McCullough at 5:34, 2:71 to John Force's 5:45. Let's go to the starting line and Don Garland.
I guess the gauntlet was thrown and you picked it up, Bernie.
That's real quick.
This is the Winston points leader, John Force, at the wheel of the Castrol Oldsmobile. John is in a somewhat unusual position here in round number 2. He does not have the opportunity to select his lane as Austin Coyle makes the final check under the fiberglass body. Force has got to be thinking back to that first round race when he lost the lane choice. He had qualified number 1 and beat Al Hoffman in round 1 with a 5:30. But Chuck Etchels, his competition here in round 2, qualified 8th and beat Dominic Santucci with a 5:29. That gave him the lane choice, and Etchels has selected the lane furthest from the camera. We're riding with John Force. And with fire coming out of the right-hand side of the engine. John Force advances to the final four. His elapsed time, 5.31 seconds. His speed, 269 miles an hour. 5:41 was the losing time for Chuck Etchell. As we look again in replay, the problems for Force were not only with the engine. This car got dangerously close to the center line. If you cross that line on the racetrack, you are disqualified. And Force had to be pulling it back, driving away from it all the way down the course. You can see the flames spitting out of the engine. That is not normal. But for Force, he had enough of a lead built up that the engine problems did not hamper his victory. Scott Coletta, at the age of 28, a second-generation drag racer. Steve?
John Force, as early as that motor started going away, I'm surprised you were able to stay with it and still run a 5:31.
Well, I didn't know what was going on. I'm concentrating on that pop in the lights. Well, the pop didn't go away, but the motor went away. But actually, I had the front end in the air, and I was on the center line and trying to get my butt off it. And winning's critical now. McCullough's staying in, and I ain't having any luck. He's not hurting himself. We're going to have to win this race ourselves.
John Force revealing just some of the pressures that build up as you quest after a share of the Winston $1 Million postseason payout. This time it was Gene Snow running the 498 for the win. Car at the Keystone Nationals, and as John Force gets ready for his race, he's got to be thinking about this car. He has had lots of problems all season long. Earlier, Steve took a look at some of the most recent ones.
By now, every racing fan knows of the fiery problems of John Force. This was Brainerd, Minnesota. He still went on to win. This was the Big Bud Shootout at Indianapolis for $50,000. On fire, Force won it. And those problems continue here in Pennsylvania. Not as dramatic, but they're still here. Now, no one hopes he finds the cure of these problems any quicker than the men and women of the Safety Safari, but still, they couldn't resist having a little fun with it. Force found this on his arrival at the track yesterday. They really don't want or need a test vehicle. He got another surprise, too, this time from a fan who gifted him with this hat. The international sign for no aces. You better hope Ed McCullough doesn't see this, because the ace doesn't need any more excuses to beat up on Force than he already has.
Force has even taken to referring to his cars as cats and having 9 lives. He's used up a couple of them already with the fires that he's had this season. His competition, the surprising Richard Hartman. As we ride with John Force, he had the lane choice. A tremendous race to the finish line, and it is Force into the finals yet again. His elapsed time, 5.31 seconds. Hartman was right there at a 5:32. As we look again in replay, you can see a very slight advantage off the starting line for Hartman, 4 thousandths of a second. As they got close to the finish line, though, Force had pulled up alongside until as they entered the speed trap at the end of the racetrack, that 66-foot-long trap, it was neck and neck. Then as they marched through that distance, it was John Force able to pull ahead and take a 5 thousandths of a second victory. Steve?
For the first time in 3 races, John Force, no fire, no oil. 5:31 to a 5:32.
I feel like I won Indy. I don't know why. All we can say is our old cats are holding out, and I just hope McCullough's out of aces, but she's dry, she's dry. We're very excited. And, you know, you got to say it to the crew. These guys can do the impossible, but Austin Coyle, the stuff I put on him to keep this thing alive, I wouldn't take from nobody, and this guy can concentrate with all that. He's doing a heck of a job.
And it's a Keystone Nationals as John Force gets ready to take on Mark Oswald. Oswald has got the lane choice. He has put Force in the lane nearest the camera. But as we've seen, it really doesn't seem to matter that much. The time's exceptionally good out of either lane. Nighttime conditions prevail here at Maple Grove. The rains earlier today forcing the finals under the lights. And for John Force, this is like the days of old. He cut his teeth night racing in Southern California. His crew chief, Austin Coyle, directing him up into the proper spot at the starting line. Mark Oswald in the far lane. The crew looking on intently for both drivers. A lot of pressure here on Force. A victory would move him 200 points further ahead of Ed McCullough in the Winston Chase. And across the finish line first is John Force. His elapsed time, 5.33 seconds. He got off the starting line ahead of Oswald. His speed, 271, and he needed every bit of that whole shot. The time for Oswald was 5.30. Look in replay. 0.06 of a second approximately at the starting line for Force. That gave him the initial lead that he never relinquished. As they passed half track, Oswald was trying to pull back. He ran a quicker elapsed time, but was a little bit late off the starting line, and that proved to be the difference. At the finish line, 42 thousandths of a second, and the Keystone Nationals Championship to John Force.
Just like 1 year ago, John Force has hole-shotted his opponent to win the Keystone Nationals. Your 5:33 beat his 5:30. Great job.
5:30?
You got it. His 5:30.
They made a mistake here. They gave me Orange County on Saturday night where I grew up and in the dark, and they gave me Austin Coyle and the best team, and Castro, Jolly Rancher, and Oldsmobile, and all these fans, and I love everybody, and that's what it's all about, I guess.
The best part is it's not on fire. It's not even singed. Maybe those troubles are over.
She's clean. I heard her on the burnout.
33 to 30.
On the burnout, I knew she was an animal, and Coyle said he was going for it. I was real nervous about her, but you ought to ask Coyle what he thinks, because this guy, I put a load on him, and I beat him up, and I'm tired of it. Coyle, give me some love over here, huh, buddy?
One thing we never tire of is listening to John Force.
Like you promised.
Steve, maybe John is beginning to show just a bit of the pressures of the Winston Chase, and this night.
A lot of times this year, and he's got me every time, so we decided we'd run a little test lap right there for John. That was for John Force, and hopefully he'll do it one more time. We'll see.
Force qualified second at a 5:24 and never one to take a challenge lightly. Responded in kind.
You know, Jim White, John, may not be a threat in the points, but he's never beaten you, and he wants to very badly. He told us that.
Well, without a doubt, the kid leaves on time. He's a real good driver, and them guys are overdue. It seems like I keep running into the guys that are overdue, and but we're overdue for a championship. We're going to give them a run for their money.
We're riding with John Force as he brings his car up to the staging beams to race Jim White. White with the lane choice has selected the lane furthest from the camera, as we have seen all of the drivers with the quicker elapsed times do. Force out in front. You don't see White, and Force wins it, advances around and picks up 200 more points on Ed McCulloch. Look at the time, 5:33 in the lane that everyone said was suspect. Steve with John Force.
Well, John, when it looked like Jim White had you on the ropes with his 5:25 and lane choice, you counter-punch, buddy, a 5:33.
Well, I was hoping we were off the deal. We just had to go for the deal. The plague's back. We got to live with it, and round for round. But most exciting was the McCulloch deal, because we know it's a tight race, and they're good racers. But I got to say this for Dunn, because Dunn said, Forrest, thanks for coming over and giving me a backup with his new boss about his job. So I want to say today, when he beat McCulloch, I had to snicker.
Oh, John, how sweet it is. John Force, as always, the best interview in motorsport.
And for our second race out to be in the final, we're really happy.
No question about it, Mike Dunn is definitely back into contention. Mark Oswald now sitting next to John Force. Force has negotiated that lane as quick as a 5:33. That came in the previous round. But Oswald has never been out of the 5:20s the entire weekend. We're riding with John Force. And as you can see, an engine explosion and fire for Force once again as parts and pieces go all over the racetrack. Force hits the fire bottles and brings the car to a safe stop, opens up the emergency hatch and climbs out the roof. What a troubled year it has been for the Winston points leader, John Force, as Mark Oswald goes on to victory and a spot in the final round. Let's look back again and see exactly what happened. As they left the starting line, it was a good start for both drivers. A slight advantage for Force, then he smoked the tires. At that point, he got back in the throttle, the engine let go into a ball of flame. The fire extinguishers kept the flames out of the cockpit, and Force got it stopped. Put yourself in the driver's seat. That's just what John Force saw when that engine let go.
Well, John, your problems have been at the finish line until now.
Well, same thing happened to Brainerd. I pedaled her and the motor revved up on me, and Coyle said, Forrest, you can't get back after it, but red car made a move, and I knew he'd run good numbers. Only way we were going to go was for the throat, and you ain't got time to think whether you're going to blow up and catch on fire. Just try to chase that old boy down, and bang, boom, whatever.
You came here for points, and you got a few.
Yeah, well, we'll take some points, and that hurt our feelings, but money can buy that, and the car's safe, and
You're all right.
Load up and head for Dallas.
We've said it before, if John Forrest wins this Winston title, it will be on the boulevard of broken parts. How about Mark Oswald?
My good friend, Steve Evans. David, the crew of John Forrest will long remember the season that was 1990. As you put it, what they have to do is win 2 more rounds of racing today than Ed McCullough to clinch their first ever Winston Championship. But things started going very sour yesterday afternoon. This was John Forrest's final qualifying run. The old nemesis was back. The engine banged, lifting the body completely off the chassis. But again, this crew worked all night trying to find the problems. They went to the starting line, round 1, earlier today against an old rival. Casey Spurlock had no idea what the car would do. What happened? Their driver came through. John Forrest strapped a whole shot on Spurlock and won with a slightly slower elapsed time. So with Forrest safely through round 1, all eyes turned to Ed McCullough racing Freddie Neely. McCullough won with a brilliant 5:28. Well, it looked brilliant at the top.
Here in round number 2 and get a big break. Tim Gross. Remember, Steve showed us the broken main cap earlier. Gross was to have been the competitor for the Castrol Olds of Force, but was unable to answer the call. So the guy they call Mr. Determination, who came from his number 9 qualifying spot with only a 5:26, is now advancing into the Final 4. This guy takes whatever he does serious as can be. Not only does he race hard, he plays hard. Remember the Darrell Gwynn benefit softball game? John Forrest, one of the toughest competitors at whatever he does. Through the quarter mile, Forrest with a great 5:27, 276 miles an hour. We'll see him a little bit later in the Final 4. Let's check in at the far end of the racetrack and Steve Evans.
Well, John Forrest, you had a break there, a bye run, but not many cars could have run with you anyway, buddy. 5:27.
Well, that single took a lot of pressure off us. It's kind of like you wonder if God loves you or hates you, because yesterday, everything we did, we felt we were being punished for, and today, just everything seems to be going right.
89.
If it keeps
Come on,
going
join
right.
on up and know everything there is to know about the sport of NHRA drag racing.
Steve, while that video is an exciting look back to 1989, I dare you to match the excitement of what's on the starting line. The potential of a Winston Championship rides in the cockpit of that Oldsmobile driven by John Forrest. He is the underdog coming into this match in the Final 4. Mike Dunn ran quicker in the previous round and's got the lane choice. A little bit of tire smoke off Forrest's car, and Dunn defeats him. Mike Dunn, a 5:21, 273 miles an hour. He has just put away today the number 2 and number 1 cars in the Winston Championship and forces John Forrest to go to Pomona to clinch the title.
One for whom the pressure is off is this man, John Forrest, 1990 Winston Funny Car Champion. It's been a season of celebration for the man known as Brute. All too often marred by the specter of a funny car driver's worst fear, fire. 7 times John has tasted victory. And each time he shared his success with his crew, headed by the legendary crew chief, Austin Coyle. Through all the fires, countless miles on the road, and 18 national events, the team maintained their direction while leading the points chase for most of the year. Here in Pomona, all that remained was to qualify, and the title would be his. That done, he turned his attention to this race. And in round 1, the unbelievable happened. Forrest fouled out of competition against Tim Gross. The red light on the right means John left too soon. Soon after, back in the pits, Steve found Forrest doing what he does best, being, well, John Forrest.
John Forrest, the season's over. What are you doing?
Well, come out here and greet the fans. They wanted a world champ. They earned it.
celebrating his first ever Winston Funny Car title. We move now into the semifinals in the Funny Car division.